Welcome everybody to Sandesh session. I don't know if we shall speak in English or Spanish because...
Yeah, you should speak in Spanish, man.
Okay, first part, en español. Para la gente de América que está uniendo a la sesión de Sandesh, no vamos a tener traducción en vivo, así que bueno, después va a quedar grabado en el canal de YouTube, así que después le pueden poner el translate en vivo que tiene YouTube y capaz que eso le pone los captions y eso le funciona. Como vamos a hacerlo todo en vivo, las interacciones pueden preguntar en el chat cuando arranquemos. También, bueno, pueden en redes sociales usar el hashtag GroundbreakersTour. Y bueno, Sandesh de repente después de la sesión puede también responderles por ahí si tienen más dudas mirando el replay de esto. Acuérdense que el evento son 2 semanas, empezamos hoy, así que bueno, aprovechen, anótense al resto de la charla, fíjense en la agenda en el sitio web de la UC. Y bueno, vamos a arrancar con Sandesh. So now for the English-speaking people joining the session, this is recording already to our web YouTube channel. So you can, if you are watching this on the recording, you can also, well, get in touch with Sandesh on the social media. Be sure to use Groundbreakers Tour hashtag. And well, if you are live, you can use the chat here in the session, and I will, at the end of the session, discuss that with Sandesh to see if we actually have time to follow that. So remember this, we are starting the 2 weeks event sessions. So go to the website, check others, and please register for the others. Don't miss any. And all yours, Sandesh.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining. My name is Sandesh. Sharing. Yeah, I'm going to start. Hang on, give me a second. Let me just share my presentation. Share my desktop. All right, does this look good?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sweet. All right, so my name is Sandesh. I've been with Oracle for almost 20 years. I've been doing a whole bunch of stuff across, databases, rack, high availability, and the last 2.5 years I've been working on AI and machine learning. One of the reasons for doing this topic is this is a very popular topic. A lot of DBAs want to learn something about autonomous database, and my goal is to basically take all the questions that I normally get from all over the field, and I try to compile these and try to put this into this FAQ manner, so that in the next 45 minutes, you're going to learn a whole bunch of stuff about autonomous database. And even if this assumes you have no experience with this, you have not seen this before, but it'll get you started and you know exactly where to go. A couple of most important things here that you need to know, and this is the only picture that you need to take, is my LinkedIn, that's right here, and then the LinkedIn, my Twitter, as well as the slide share where this presentation will be uploaded, as well as this will be available in the LAOUC site after the presentation is complete. All right, so we have a action-packed 45 minutes. So there's going to be a lot of stuff happening here. I'm going to try to cover most of these and probably like have 2 minutes or something per feature, so you can expect me to go a little bit faster on this. But this is going to be a lot of cool learning. So we're going to start off with the first one here, which is how do you get started with the free tier. Normally, everybody knows this, but I'll just quickly cover this anyways. So if you want to use the autonomous database, there's actually a free tier where you don't have to pay any money, you don't have to give credit cards. You have to give credit cards, but they don't charge you for it. They just want to verify who you are and stuff like that. What you get with this is basically you get 2 compute VMs, 1/8 of CPU each, and 1 GB of memory each. You get 2 block volumes, they're 100 GB each. You get 5 free backups. These are 5 free backups that do not come out of this. Any backups that you take, they will come out of this storage of the 100 gig. And then there's 10 gigs of object, 10 gigs of archive, 50,000 per month API requests. You get a load balancer with 10 megabits of bandwidth, and you get 10 terabytes a month for outbound data transfer, as well as you get 500 million ingest data points. So it's pretty cool. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the free offering, and this is what you can spin up without actually having to pay Oracle any money. How do you do this? You just go to the autonomous database option, and then you create database. You can either specify ATP or ADW, which is transaction processing or data warehouse. And here, you pick this option here, which always says, always show free configuration options to ensure you don't select something that requires you to pay. And as of December 5th, 2019, all the features like Oracle Machine Learning, Oracle Spatial, Oracle Graph, all of this stuff is free with the Oracle database. So you're required to pay a license for using all these features. So whether you're using this thing on-prem, you're using this on the autonomous cloud, you don't have to pay anything for using these particular features. So make sure you use this. So this is about the Oracle free autonomous cloud option, which is a good way to get started in a couple of minutes, and you don't have to pay any money. And the credit card verification is only to ensure to know who you are, and it does not charge you anything on your card. So the second topic, how do you get started with Oracle machine learning? So this is one of my favorite topics because this is the area where I spend most of my time in. But a lot of people tell me, how do I get started with this? So there are different kinds of methods that you can use Oracle machine learning for going through the analysis of all your data. You can use attribute importance, you can use classification, you can use regression, clustering, anomaly detection. I don't have time to go through all of these, but these are all the different kinds of patterns. They're classified into supervised and unsupervised learning. And all of these are available in some form or the other through the Oracle machine learning interface. Now, this is basically, and it enables you to go as a developer or a DBA to basically go on to becoming a data scientist and doing full data understanding, preparation, modeling, evaluation, deployment, all of this stuff as part of the Oracle machine learning exercise. So how do you do this? Now, the screens are old. I don't change the screens because the screens keep changing, but the flow is the same. So you have to follow the flow consistently. You go through the service console. In the service console, you sign in as the admin user. This is the user you create when you create the autonomous database for the first time. And then once you log in, you go to this manage Oracle ML users, and in there you create a new user. Now this is another user that you want to log in, and you want to only give them OML privileges. They're not going to get DB privileges and all that you can determine based on what you've granted to them. But once you create the OML user, you specify their email ID, and an email goes to that user, and that user can go to this, and there's an option to click and sign into this particular page using the credentials that you have created for them. The first time they sign in, they have to change their credentials when they sign in. Then afterwards, you don't know what their credentials are, and they're kind of on their own. Once you sign in, this is the sign-in screen. You get this main interface, and which is basically here. The most important part is you can go to your notebooks. You can go to the gallery to see pre-existing notebooks. You can create a SQL script, or you can run just a SQL statement. All of these options are available for you as part of the OML homepage when you sign in. So this is how you get started with this. What are the things I can do with this? Now here's some examples of what you can do with this. So here's something. What I want to do is I want to compare average purchase amounts, men versus women, and I want to group them by income level. So basically I want to see if men and women buy different stuff, what do they buy differently? And that I calculate this by using statistical differences. It's very easy to see the first three columns, what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find sold to men, sold to women. But this is the main key here. It's basically stats T in depu. This basically tells you I'm calculating F test values, and I'm also looking at a two-sided p-value. Forget what these are. They're basically ways for me to measure who's buying stuff differently. So if I get a p-value that's less than 0.05, then it shows statistically significant differences in the amounts purchased by men and women. So this is basically the column I have to look at. This is the income level. I'm trying to correlate this with this. And what this tells me is in which case men and women are buying significantly different stuff using a simple SQL statement as this. So this is for t-test and f-test comparisons using statistical functions. Example number 1. Example number 2. This is for something called attribute importance. Attribute importance is a way to find out, if I'm trying to build a machine learning model, which are the columns or which are the input attributes that I should take. Now, most of the times people know what their attributes are. Sometimes they don't. If they want to find out, this is a way to go about doing this. You go here, you build it. This is the model name. This is the mining function I'm using. So I'm using attribute importance. And then I'm using this. This is the data where the input comes from. This is the target column in this table that I'm trying to say whether I should buy insurance or I should not buy insurance. And then there's another table as input. This table contains the settings for attribute importance. What are the various parameters for attribute importance? This is all I need to build a model. Once I've built a model, then I can query it using this query. And this shows me the ranks. And these are the two most important things I need to care about. How much money do you have, and how much money have you overdrawn? So these are the two important criteria I need to look at before I decide whether I need to sell insurance to this person or not. And this is called attribute importance. This is another method of machine learning where you can find out which columns are the most interesting when you're building a machine learning model. This is all using OML. There are also all of these different galleries where you can see existing notebooks that are already there. You can build your examples on top of that. This is exciting. This kind of takes it to the new level. Now, one thing that's always been a personal crib of mine is machine learning is sometimes complicated, but you don't need to know about it. It's just a tool, right? It's like if you're a DBA, you know how the SGA works, but you don't know how it works internally, but you don't care as long as you can manage your buffer cache, your shared pool, and all of these resources, right? So machine learning is a tool, and that's exactly what it is. There are three aspects of it: algorithm selection, feature selection, hyperparameter tuning. And this, of course, there's test and training set, but that's not covered as part of this. So what you do is, today this is a manual procedure. Which algorithm should I pick? How do I reduce my features? I can use attribute importance to reduce my features, but it's a step. I still have to do it. How do you tune my hyperparameters? Which values are good? Good news for that. We're coming up with this thing. It's called AutoML in the Autonomous Database Cloud. Now, what is this thing going to do? Now, here's an example of some data that's loaded. It's automatically calculated the importance using AutoML. And this is an example of running different models for different algorithms. And it does it all automatically. You don't have to do this. And the biggest thing that this does is it enables non-expert users to basically leverage machine learning. That's the whole idea behind this thing, is how do you use AutoML to go through different data. You can build model leaderboards, which means you can see which model is better than the other model. And this completely unifies model deployment and monitoring. So this is coming, and this will be part of the autonomous database at some point. So just summarizing point number 2, it's collaborative UI. You can play with this, you can create your own templates, you can share stuff, you can build your own models, and you don't need access to anything else apart from your database schema and your notebooks. So this is a pretty cool interface way of doing this. And then there's OML for Pi that's actually coming in this, where you can write code in Python and interface with open source libraries, and you can interface with the Oracle Data Science Cloud to actually do things between the database and between just a generic environment where you don't need a database while you're writing your machine learning models. So this is something that's pretty cool. It's point number 2. Point number 3, using OCI Resource Manager to deploy reference architectures. Now, first of all, this is not the database resource manager. Let me clarify this. Oracle has this feature. It's called the Resource Manager in OCI. It is actually an automation mechanism for deploying Terraform templates. What is Terraform? Terraform is a declarative framework that's developed by HashiCorp, and it's a method to use infrastructure as code. Simple language, I want 5 machines. I want a VM, I want a bunch of web servers, I want a database server, I want a load balancer. I can write a small script that basically provisions all of these things in something called HCL or HashiCorp language, and I can deploy this. But I have to manage my stack. I have to figure out how these pieces work. I have to track its current status and all that stuff. How do I do this directly within OCI? There's an option in Resource Manager. This is the OCI Resource Manager. This is not the database Resource Manager. And this basically says in Resource Manager, you can configure stacks. The stacks, there are 3 things you can do with a stack. You can prepare the stack, you can apply the stack, and you can destroy the stack. Now, what are these 3 things? So anything to do with Terraform, Terraform is a declarative framework. So you specify what you want, and it goes ahead and creates this in the order or sequence in which it is supposed to be created. So it knows that if you need a database server and a web server, you need the web server first, and then you need the database server later, and then you connect the 2 after the 2 resources are provisioned. So it knows the order sequence, right? So if I'm creating a server, it creates the VCN, it creates the security list, the NSGs for it, and then it automatically connects them back to the VM. So it knows the order or sequence of creation of the resources. That's what Resource Manager helps you with. And what you have to do is, when you create your zip file, which contains your HashiCorp files, you upload this to the Resource Manager, and then from there on, you can manage this entire stack using OCI. So you don't have to manage your terraform.tf state and a whole bunch of files that basically come with this. So in this case, I can create a stack, but I can take it to the next level. I can basically say, I want to do a departmental data warehouse. So what this does is it provisions ADW and an Oracle Analytics Cloud instance to automatically ingest data from multiple sources. So you can see here, I can use a sample solution, or I can create my own source code control solution for the terraform.tf state file, or I can specify, this is a version of the Terraform template that I have. So just by specifying any of these options, it automatically creates the entire infrastructure for me on the cloud. There are many screens in this example. but I've just kind of gone to the last screen where it just shows me that I've specified my data warehouse, I've specified the description, what Terraform version it is, and what database name it comes from. It is autonomous, and what my public IP in this case is that is accessible to this, as well as what my Oracle Analytics Cloud infrastructure is. So I can create an entire solution using the templates that are present in the Oracle Resource Manager. Feature number 4. How do I change my settings once I've created my autonomous database? Now, what does settings mean? My autonomous database by default is exposed to the public, which means anybody that knows the public endpoint and has access to the credential keys and the username password can basically connect to it. But we released a feature a couple of months ago, which are called private endpoints. Private endpoints means you don't want this thing accessible over the public internet, but you want a way for OCI internal resources within your VCN or across VCNs, depending upon your access control list, to be able to access this stuff. So how do you do this, right? So in the ADW screens, you go to more actions, and then you go and you pick update network access. By default, it allows secure access from everywhere. Or you can basically switch it to go only to your VCN. And there's an access control list here that filters based on IP addresses and values. Now, what do I do here? I can change this to go to VCN. And in VCN, I've specified what my VCN is, what subnet it is, what's my host prefix, and what my network security group is. What is a network security group? By default, whenever I'm connecting to anything on a VCN, there are 2 ways to access or create security. One is called a network security group. The other one is called a security list. The security list is very simple. It's on a subnet basis, and I can control which IP addresses, which ports come in and so the ingress and the egress rules can be configured on a subnet level using something called a security list. Now, there's also another way to create security by creating this list, but only in this case, it's on top of the VNIC. The VNIC is the way that the applications are associated with a particular VCN. And the rules are applicable on top of the VNIC, and that is called a network security group. Why is network security group sometimes more advantageous than security lists? Because network security groups allow you to apply a policy across different users of a particular type of resource. Like I can say, for all databases, enable port 1522. So then I can attach this NSG to any VNIC, and the same rule will apply for all databases. Whereas a security list only applies to a subnet and all resources within that subnet. So it's a little less flexible as compared to network security groups. So that's the difference between network security groups and security lists. Once I specify this, it's going to force me to download a new wallet and reestablish all my connections to a DB because I'm changing the endpoint from public to private. So just to summarize this feature, what have I done here? This is a data warehouse instance. It's in a compartment. And what I've done is, this is basically shared infrastructure. I've created my own VCN. That's the name of the VCN. That's the name of the subnet in the VCN. Here's my private endpoint, what I can connect to. And this is the URL of the private endpoint in case I want to connect or curl or try to find access to find if it's active or not. Or I can connect a load balancer to configure this as a backend. And I've created a network security group to this that provides some kind of security as to who connects to this. And the only person that can connect to this will depend on the ingress and egress rules that are defined inside this network security group. Within this VCN, across this VCN, have I established remote peering, local peering? All of these rules apply. So this is how you switch from a public viewing endpoint to a private endpoint. This was number 4. Number 5, wallet rotations. Everybody wants to rotate credentials all the time. So you can do wallet rotations. There are 2 types of wallets. The first one is very simple. It's instance wallets. So every instance has a wallet. And once you rotate this wallet, you have to download the new wallet and you cannot reconnect back to the database with the old wallet anymore. But if you have regional wallets, everything still works. So regional wallet basically works for all database instances, okay? So you need to be very careful with whom you distribute the regional wallets. Usually people use a per instance wallet. So even if you disable an instance wallet, the regional wallet still works because it allows you to work across everything. But if you terminate a regional wallet and you rotate this, every other instance wallet is invalid and you have to re-download their corresponding wallets. So this is the difference between the two. You go to DB connection, and then you rotate the wallet, and then you can verify the status. Here it says, excuse me, here it says rotation in progress. Takes a couple of minutes, and once the rotation finishes, and I'll talk about this when how do we do work request. This is basically how you track its status, and this is true for every resource using OCI. So once you finish rotating all these wallets, you have to go back and re-download all these wallets in order to reconnect and do your stuff. So this is basically how you do credential management. By the way, a wallet contains certificates, contains your files like your TNS names or your SQLnet or and a whole bunch of stuff that's required to perform end-to-end encryption from your client to your database servers. So this is basically to provide end-to-end encryption and authentication from your client to your database servers, and that's the reason we have this. Point number 6, partitions with external tables. I have a lot of tables. They're sitting in the cloud. I want to access this stuff. What do? I just create partitions. But how do I access these partitions? All my stuff is in the object store. So I create these links. These links can be something called pre-authenticated requests, or they can be specific object store links. I have a credential management thing that I've set up here. The format of these files are comma separated, new line for every new line, US7 ASCII format, partition by call 1, and each and every one of these guys is basically on the object store. And this is the partition scheme. It's pretty simple. So I have a bunch of files and I've enabled them directly to access. Remember, you have to use DBMS Cloud for everything. That's what you use. But this allows you to access files in the object store without actually having to do anything. You can do the same thing with a mix match. So I have files here, but I also have a DB partition here. So in this case, these files can be anywhere in the Oracle Object Store, in S3 or in Azure, and you can use either explicit authentication or you can use something called pre-authenticated URIs, which is what I call PARs, which are URLs that you create, and once you create these credentials, you can share them with somebody. Those URLs never appear again, which means you cannot, once you create these things, and whoever has those URLs can continue accessing the buckets. Once you copy and give it to them and you don't have them anymore, you can't access those buckets anymore. So people use this as a quick way to access something without having to continuously keep creating credentials for those people. Now this is the same example, except in this case, you notice there are these two statements for the Swift object storage. The last guy here has no object store link. This basically means anything that is less than 2000, between 2000 and 3000 goes into this partition that's present inside the database, and everything else basically continues to access the object store via external tables. So remember this, the procedure is different. It's called hybrid part table. So that's the difference between the procedures. How do you track work requests? Number 7. So by default, I'm creating an autonomous database here. So I pick a compartment, I pick the data warehouse, and then this screen comes. So then I'm like, okay, what's going on? How do I access my database, right? So there's this thing in the bottom corner called work requests. And this is not just for this is for everything you do in OCI, right? If you want to check the status of anything of what happens in OCI, you can use this. Now you click on the work request and it shows you what's happening here. Is it creating the database? How long is it taking? Everything is displayed in these work request screens. 3 things that are important to note here. This shows you status, how long it's going to take. These show you the messages and their timestamps. This shows you any error message that's actually happening here. And this shows you any associated resources you have. This is a simple case of autonomous database creation, which means you'll only see one resource here. But if you're creating a complex infrastructure using OCI Resource Manager, you'll see multiple resources out here that are connected or associated with what you're trying to create. So this is a really cool way to track what is happening for your action, and look for this. It's called work requests. And this will be present in every resource creation that you have across this. Whether you're creating a database, a compute, a load balancer, it doesn't matter. You will see this there. Performance monitoring. By default, with ADB, you can monitor, you can use metrics, alarms, and notifications. We'll come to this exactly to see what this is. These are the various things you can see here. CPU, memory, fail sessions, how many statements are queued, fail logins, transaction counts, parse counts, all of this stuff. Some basic charts, or which I call the top 6 charts, are available as part of ADB by default. You don't have to do anything to set this up, and you can quickly create any kind of alarms on these metrics that as you would like. So we'll see the alarm aspect in one of the other parts of this presentation, but this is what you can see as the top 6 metrics. You can view the complete list of service metrics as part of monitoring. So monitoring consists of 2 things, remember, metrics and alarms, not notifications. Notifications is not part of monitoring. Notifications is a different service. Within the monitoring service, there's the service metrics and there's the alarms. So these are the 2 things, and there's health checks. These are 2 things that you can do within the monitoring framework. And the notifications ties into this, but it's a separate service. So you can set up, you can go to your corresponding compartment, and then when you pick this, so OCI compute agent is for all computes. OCI object storage for all object. OCI autonomous database is for creating metrics for tracking metrics or creating alerts on top of anything to do with autonomous database. So remember this is called a metrics namespace, and OCI autonomous database is what is used to track this metric namespace. All right, now let's go into details of this, right? So number 9, how do you set these metrics? How do you play with this stuff? So I have a lot of screens here, but I'm just going to quickly go through these to give you an idea of how to create these metrics. So first of all, I pick my compartment. Then I pick my metric namespace, which is OCI autonomous database. And then I create an alarm here. Now this is, I want to basically set up an alarm that if the CPU utilization goes above 55%, for a minute, I want some kind of a notification. So I create an alarm in alarm definitions. I specify what the alarm is. It's a high CPU warning. I specify that this is a warning. I don't want some DBA to be paged. I specify what the alarm body is. And in this case, I specify what sort of thing I'm tracking. So I go to the metrics namespace of OCI autonomous database. The resource is CPU utilization for 1 minute intervals, and I want the mean statistic for 1 minute. And then I specify if this is greater than 55%, I want to send an alert, but I want to delay the alert by a minute, because what happens is, what if after a minute it just drops and goes back? So I don't want to send false alerts. So I want to wait a minute before I send the alert. In this, it tells me what my CPU utilization is. Now you notice one thing out here. This thing shows up with this. This is basically called MQL. This is a metrics query language. This is basically saying CPU utilization, and I have one of the things, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go into the presentation. But this is called MQL. And then I say pick an email option, and then I create a topic for email where I can specify when this happens, this particular person has to be emailed, and I create the topic. It's that simple as that. So this is how I create an alarm when CPU utilization goes above 55%, measured in a mean by 1 minute, and I can send this out. So we'll go through, I just quickly want to go through this. There's this thing called monitoring query language or metrics query language, where you can specify for CPU utilization, 1 minute sampling, pick the max if it's greater than 80%, and I want to group and aggregate this to find the number of machines that have CPU utilization greater than 80%. It's very simple. This is really powerful. And once you start using this, you can use this really well. Same thing, I want to find out all the availability domains that have a success rate of less than 0.99, sample this by a minute, and group and sum this stuff together. So I'll find out the total number of availability domains that have a success rate of less than 0.99. This is called monitoring query language, or MQL. And you can, once you start getting used to this, you can write a whole bunch of stuff to monitor things by just going through this, and without going through that huge screen that I had where you have to write all of those things, you can just write a simple query. Number 10, I'm just halfway through the presentation. I'm already through 30 minutes. So I'm going to speed up a little bit here. So first is upgrading to 19C. All new databases will be 19C. There are some old databases that are still running on 18C. These will be available for some time, but you will be expected to upgrade it at some point or the other. You do need to test your application against this. And it's usually easier to just create a clone of your current database to 19C and you test your application using this clone. 18C databases will be available until September 2020, after which you will be given the option to upgrade. And then once we cross a certain threshold, all databases will be upgraded to 19C. Number 11, Performance Hub. Performance Hub allows you to look at performance-related information. It is part of the ADW screens, and it shows you information about what you can see, average active sessions, Ash analytics, as well as you can see the main, the main screen here, which shows you all the sessions and what is happening within those sessions. So this is the entry point. It allows you to select things. Last 60 minutes is selected, but you can select 8 hours, 24 hours, last week, custom range. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with the time selector. There's also something new that's been added is a time zone control. So you can specify this here, and within that specific time zone, you can change things. You can look at SQLs, number 12. For SQLs, you can look at what SQLs have been running, how long they've been running, what is their execution plan, and there's a couple of statuses to see what is happening with these particular SQLs. So here's a SQL that's running, it's running, that's a SQL ID, that's the username that's basically running it. Basic stuff that we are used to seeing as DBAs that we want to be able to see. You want to see plans, you want to see what the plan stats are, you want to see what the text is, you want to see the activity, where the CPU utilization is actually going. I want to see it by resource type, I want to see it by plan statistics or plan types. I can see which part of the plan is basically consuming more resources. All of this information is available as part of this real-time monitoring in these screens. You can look at buffer cache activity, you can look at PGA usage, and you can save this report as well. So this is for SQL-related analytics. It's all available as part of ADW. Number 13, you have Ash. You can look at everything that I showed you before, except you can also drill down to the next level. So these are SQLs that I have in Performance Hub. And I can click on every one of these, and it shows me by 2 dimensions. In this case, it is by weight class and weight event. I can change this, go advanced, and I can switch this to multiple. I can switch the dimensions and go to multiple dimensions. So now I'm looking at weight class, weight events, and SQL ID. So I can look at it with 3 different levels. And I can also look at how many samples I want to look at. So there's a lot of information that as DBAs, we are used to seeing. In this case, I want to basically look at the entire system from the dimensions of the weight class, the weight event, and then organized by the SQL ID. So it gives me a good bird's eye view. And I can also filter and switch between the various dimensions in the weight events, as well as the various kinds of characteristics within the SQL ID. So it gives me all of these options. So most of us who have used Enterprise Manager or tools like this before, kind of used to this. But a lot of times when people came and said, hey, autonomous database, I want to be able to have some of this control, people never knew how to access this. So now you can, because you have all this stuff as part of the Performance Hub. Now, a new thing that has been introduced is called a workload tab. The workload tab, it helps identify performance spikes and bottlenecks. This is really cool, and you should actually give this a shot. And there are 4 charts here for CPU wait time stats and something called workload profiles, which track user call executions as well as transactions happening with them, as well as sessions for current logons and number of sessions that are coming in. So you can look at your entire workload as a whole rather than looking at individual pieces of your workload. And this is a very good initial triage if you want to see if something is wrong with your application or not. And this is called workload metrics on the Performance Hub. Number 14. This is simple. I know most people know it, but we have Apex, SQL Developer, and a whole bunch of other tools that are present inside the autonomous services, whether it is ADW or ADP. You can use Apex to create reports and a whole bunch of stuff. This is one of the coolest tools you'll probably ever have. And a lot of people don't know that this is always free and it's always part of the autonomous database. So if you don't know how to use this, it's a good method to get started with this. At the same time, you can also write queries for OML and include those queries and create nice fancy reports on this and show this to your boss saying, hey, look at all this stuff that I've done. And you can expose all of this as part of the autonomous database. So Apex, SQL Workshop, SQL Modeler, whole bunch of tools that are available for free as part of the autonomous database offerings. Number 15, machine learning notebooks. Everybody knows I showed you guys how to log in and create a machine learning account. Once you're in this, there's a simple SQL scratchpad. Well, what this is actually a machine learning notebook using Zeppelin. You can go in here and you can start typing in your queries. This is no different than any SQL scratchpad, except there's a whole bunch of new features you get as part of this. So once you play this particular SQL, you have visualization tools. So you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff out here which allow you to do all sorts of interesting things with this and execute machine learning code. So this is basically how Jupyter notebooks or Zeppelin notebooks look when you're writing machine learning code. And you want to be able to visualize some of this data without actually having to write too much code for it. So these are the various options. I can view group or stacked bar graphs. This is based on output from machine learning code. Okay, so this is just visualization tools that help you look at another dimension of ML code that you can basically write. Okay, and here you can basically pull the fields. You can group them and stack them based on the layout, based on the distribution of the information. So there's a whole bunch of cool stuff you can do. You can share this, you can create a workspace. So all these are features available in the notebook interface that's part of OML. And you can basically save this, you can share this, you can create a workspace for this, and you can also put this in the notebook gallery. This is called OML notebooks. This is feature number 15. Number 16. How do you auto scale instances? You just click on this button and it will scale up to 3x the number of CPUs that are base allocated. So if I've allocated one CPU, it will maximally scale to 3 CPUs. And when the resource utilization drops, it will slowly come back from 3 to 2, 2 to 1, and it will go back to your base CPU allocation as what it is. So what this does is it looks continuously when you're exceeding the threshold of like running 100% CPU utilization for some time. It'll think you can probably do things faster by allocating something in a burst fashion and scaling it up and down. So it's pretty cool. It's used to manage peak traffic loads, and it does not change. But one thing that's important to remember is that it does not change the concurrency and the parallelism settings for the current services. Okay, so even though you may be allocating more CPUs, it does not increase that. So you can increase and then you can decrease depending on how your workloads go. For data warehouse based queries, it's like you want to ensure that when you're running month-end reporting, when you're running machine learning models, when Monday morning sales reports have to be done, or any ad hoc things come in, that's when you'll use this. For transaction processing, again, month-end transaction processing, or any kind of machine learning modeling, you will use this. These are the use cases. And when you create a database, or you can edit a database after it has been created, you can select the auto scaling option and it takes effect. Auto scaling is a dynamic operation. It does not require shutdowns or anything. It happens pretty much in near real time as the application is currently being used. There's no outage involved in this. Number 17. You can now download AWR reports. A lot of DBAs didn't like the fact that they can see everything on their screen, but they can't download AWR reports. So now, when you go to the databases, you can choose your compartment, and in the compartment, you can display the database. You click on Performance Hub, you select a range of what you want in the Performance Hub, and there's an option that you can say, I want the reports. And then you click the AWR reports, and once you pick the sample, the difference between which you want, the HTML file downloads to your browser. And you can start debugging and looking at things directly on your system and not on our system. So if you can debug something using the Performance Hub, it's great. But if you love to have your AWR reports on your machine and you want to look at this thing and you want to analyze it like how you've been analyzing it over the years, we have this option now. You can download your AWR reports and do your analysis. That was number 17. Number 18, how do you load data? You can load data using DBMS Cloud. So this is the default way to do this. So first thing is you create this credential, the credential name, username. Either this can be a username, password. This can be this can also be an OAuth, token that you can use. So there are 3 methods to authenticate usually to OCI: username, password. You can use key pair signing, or you can use methods like creating an auth token. Auth token is usually what the ADW instances use when they're communicating. So any third party that wants to communicate to OCI can make use of an auth token method. And once the auth token is generated, you can embed that auth token as part of your credential management. So that's one method that you can use. Now, once you create this, there are different ways of accessing different kinds of data. I've just put the syntax here, so that kind of makes more sense. In this case, the procedure is the same. It's DBMS Cloud copy data. That's the table I want to load something to. That's the credential I created in the previous screen. And this is the object store URL. So this, the object store service, the place, the server you want to load this from. So this is the US Phoenix 1 region. The /n indicates a namespace. /b indicates a bucket name. /o indicates the actual object name, the actual file on the object store. And I'm specifying that this is a comma delimited value file. It's a text file. A very simple example of loading a comma delimited file directly into the database. Now let's take things to the next level. I want to do the same thing, except I want to do this for the export dumps. So I specify the object type as datapump. So now I'm loading an export dump from the object store into the database. Same thing here, except here, I'm taking a JSON file and I'm taking anything that is basically every subsequent, so this is a JSON file with multiple entries, and I'm taking every single entry as a collection record and I'm putting this into the database. The next one, I have an array of JSON entries. So what I'm doing is I'm specifying the 0x01 as a record delimiter, and I'm offering this option called unpack arrays. So it will unpack the arrays and it will take each row in each array and load them as individual rows inside the DB. So this is a pretty cool option if you have a JSON file that contains multiple arrays and you want to unpack the arrays and you will load these as individual rows into the table instead of loading them as objects containing multiple entries. So these are different methods. There's a file here called user load operations. This is how you track things. And then you can see any comments that are being created. So these are all credentials, user load operations. These are the tables that you will look at if something does not work. Now, feature number 19, ADB supports SQL access to tenancy details. People ask you, hey, okay, what is this instance? You know, every time you file a support request, they will ask you, what is your OSID? Okay, and what is the OSID for this resource? So there are two things you will need. You'll need your tenancy OSID, and you will need your OSID for the resource that you're talking about every time when you log a service request. Now people start looking through different user interface screens. Now all you have to do is select cloud identity from $PDBs, and all this information is displayed to you. So it's very easy to file a support request by just looking up this data. Last feature, number 20, autonomous data guard for ADB. This is a feature that was recently released. It provides data guard functionality. It provides automatic failover with zero data loss. It also provides manual switchover, and it is enabled on 19C or higher databases. Right now, what's available is within the particular AD or cross Exadata machines or failure domains, and cross region is expected next. What do you do here? How do you enable this? There's just one option here. You just have to enable this, and that's it. It creates the instance. It transfers everything. It provides automatic failover. So in this case, what's happening is the database has had an outage. So you can notice the database is going into an updating status. And then here, automatically, these things become disabled because you can't initiate a failover because there's already a primary transition in progress. So this is an automatic failover in action. When the database is perfectly running fine, you have the option to switch over. When the database is not running so fine, you have the option of failover, where you may have potential data loss for whatever condition that has caused this particular situation. All right, that's all I had. I know it's a lot of content, and I think I just consumed all my 45 minutes. But if we have time for questions, I'd like to take some.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Sandesh, for really great presentation. We have several questions from the audience. So okay. I will read you some of them because some are in Spanish. So we have first Alberto asking he has two autonomous instances, how do he manage the wallet in order to be able to connect to both at the same time?
You could create instance-specific wallets. That wallet allows you to connect to both instances. That way, you're not managing individual wallets. The disadvantage of creating an instance wallet is basically you have the same authentication mechanism to connect to everything, which is usually not as, which is kind of, it's like, do you want private security for each database, or do you want just a universal kind of a thing for every instance? A better way to manage this is not using wallets, but use OCI IAM rules. You can actually specify compartments, credentials. You can configure users to say you're only part of this compartment and you can only do these kind of operations within this compartment. You can actually use IAM to control which users log in and which users don't log in. That's one option. I would usually recommend instance-based wallets, not regional wallets, because once you create a regional wallet, anybody that has that regional wallet can access all databases that are running in that particular region. So there's advantages to this, but there's disadvantages. And credential management is no different than you are doing this on-prem. You don't give the same username passwords to all the databases to you. So that's kind of the same thing with wallets.
Okay, great. The other question from Facundo asking if an alarm can be configured only for a specific range of hours for the day.
Sorry, I didn't get the question, Nelson.
If an alarm can be configured only for a specific range of hours?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can have that level of fine granularity. There's an option. Remember when I showed you the MQL? In the MQL, you can specify a where clause. The where clause can indicate things like what time you can execute this on, what resource you can execute this on, or if this resource comes from a particular region, only execute this on. So when you specify MQL, CPU utilization 1 minute in brackets, right? Grouping by block, there's a where clause. In that where clause, you can specify this. Sorry, I'm used to doing this on the command line, so that's where I can think of, but there's also something in the user interface where you can specify whether you can track the metric, whether you want to raise an alarm, or you want to raise an alarm, but you don't want to raise a notification. There are many, many methods where you can control things as to whether you will get a message or not from this notification. It's called a blackout, by the way. In the notification area, there's something called a blackout. You can set up a blackout saying, from night 9 o'clock to morning 6 o'clock, don't bother me, send this to somebody else. You can set up a blackout on notifications.
Okay, great. Another one from Hector asking which privileges or roles should you have to use the Performance Hub?
You need to have access to that autonomous database. That's it. So as long as you have access to that database, you can access the Performance Hub. If you don't want somebody to access the Performance Hub, they should not have access to that database. The Performance Hub is a complete read-only user-based interface that allows you to gain access for everything for that particular autonomous database. So you can't really do anything with it. You can only view data. You can debug something, and then you need privileges to log into the DB and do all sorts of interesting things. So you need access to the autonomous database to view its Performance Hub. So if you're a DBA, usually people get. So what you do is you take databases and you put them into compartments, and you assign the compartments to DBAs. So if the DBA does not have privileges to see that database, then they don't see that database. If you see the database, then you have to be able to administer things to that database. You can create a user that has no privilege at all for the administration of that database and just has access to a schema, and that user will not be able to see the Performance Hub. So anybody that has the admin privileges for the database will be able to see the Performance Hub.
Okay, great. Another question is if you are going to share the PDF of the presentation.
Yes. On my slide share, and I'll also give this to Nelson later, and he's going to upload this to the LAOUC site.
Okay, great. Hector is asking if you can share the text scripts that you are using for the MES Cloud. I think
all of these scripts are actually available. It depends on what scripts you want. Like all the Terraform scripts, most of the scripts that I use are already present on the OCI GitHub repository. So there are already sample scripts that are available. So what I'll do is now I'll try to put some of the links to these things in a slide at the end of my presentation before I upload it. But just search for OCI GitHub repository, and you will find a whole bunch of scripts out there. I'm just using the scripts that they already have built.
Okay.
Whether they are Terraform scripts or anything.
We have Erica asking if it is possible to add new partitions on an external table without recreating the entire table.
I haven't done this. I don't know if it should be possible to do this or not. my guess is you would have to recreate the external table. Normally, you would not have to, but I don't know how the object bucket-based privileges will actually work with this. I need to try this. Sorry, I have not done this. I usually just create a table and I play with it and I destroy the table and I'm done. I don't go and perform modifications on this particular table because anyways, it's an external table. So, it's just a construct, right? It's just a metadata construct. So every time it's always easier to just recreate the table because the data is already there. You can't perform any modifications to it. It's just using the internal built-in SQL loader drivers to basically see the format of how the data is there and it loads it back up. So honestly, it doesn't make too much of a difference if you're just recreating an external table. It's not like you're dropping the data or anything like that.
Okay, great. So 2 more questions to finish. So we have Facundo asking how to load a DMP file, which is in a bucket to Autonomous.
DBMS Cloud. DBMS Cloud. I covered this in one of my, give me 1 second. Let me share my screen again. If I go back to DBMS Cloud, and this is basically what you do. So you specify the table, you specify the credentials. In this case, this is the credentials, and this is the object storage. This is the region. This is the namespace. This is the bucket. This is the export dump. And I specify the complete link to the actual file itself. And then also specify the format as data pump. This is the thing that you need to load a export dump directly into the Autonomous database.
Okay, great. Well, the last one to finish says from Jorge asking if you can implement machine learning with Apex in ATP.
Yes, you can. So all you have to do is, you remember the sequels I showed you? As long as the person has access to the appropriate schema and the OML user, you can build your machine learning models, and then you just have to execute those sequels. The 2 examples I showed you where you can find differences between what men and women shop using p-values, using f-test and t-test statistical functions, as well as the second example where I showed attribute importance. Those are simple sequels. They're sequels built on top of schemas that are sitting inside the Autonomous database. Anything that is exposed in a SQL can basically be loaded in Apex. As long as you have privileges to access that particular schema and execute that particular SQL, you can prepare Apex reports on it. So the best part is they're all connected to the Autonomous database, whether it is OML, whether it is Apex. If you have the appropriate privileges for both, you can actually write reports for running OML functions directly inside Apex. You don't need, notebooks are just a way to play with it. Once you've finalized what you want to do, it's very easy to write these things in Apex. As a matter of fact, that's what we do. We write all our reports that call out some of these machine learning things in Apex directly.
Okay, great. There were 2 more new questions, so I think we have time to take it.
Yeah, please.
Ruben is asking something that I understand well, but I will read it anyway. So maybe, Ruben, you can clarify better. It says, in WAD disappears ODI and a question mark. I don't get that.
I don't get that. I no, okay. I don't.
Let's move to another question to Alberto, and let's see if Ruben clarifies that. Alberto is asking if when connecting to the cloud, I get the disconnection frequently. Is there any way to avoid that or reduce it?
It depends on where you're connecting, what you're connecting. There are so many factors out here. If you are connecting and say, for example, there is some kind of a firewall or a keep alive that's between your network and the Autonomous cloud, then your packets will be dropped and your connection will be dropped. But this is basically your network. If you are idle for some time, we expire the connection. That's one thing, but that usually won't look at a dropped connection. It will look like just something that has expired because you've just left your screen open for some time. That's true of anything. You log into your bank account, it expires and it just says you've logged out. So if you're getting constantly disconnected in extremely short periods of time, it's probably got something to do with your network and not ours, because our keep alive times are well advertised. You can connect to this and within a couple of minutes of not being of being idle, then we expire it from the screen. But also what happens is as people use more and more of Autonomous, they start scripting things using the OCI CLI. OCI CLI is a Python-based user interface that is used for performing most activities. Now, as a DevOps guy, as an operational person, as a person using Terraform, Ansible, or any of these things along with our cloud, everything is scripted. So once people write stuff using scripted, they're no longer on the user interface. So most of our stuff that we do is using scripting. So we don't get disconnected that often. Whenever we want to connect, we perform the activity, we disconnect, and we move on. So I don't know the answer to your question, but my guess is it is something to do with the network on your side.
Okay, great. We don't have any other questions. So thank you very much, Sandesh. Really.
Thank you
really
so
great
much,
session.
guys. I'm sorry, this was a lot of material in a very short period of time, but I hope this was useful. Just 1 second. Let me just kind of show the screen again. People are asking where can they download this presentation and stuff like that. So these are the only 3 things you need to know. There's my Twitter handle. That's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. And this is the slide share where I will upload this presentation. So if you want to take a screenshot or a picture of this, this is the only screen you need to take a picture of. And you'll get this entire deck.
Okay, well,
all right.
Thank you very much, Sandesh. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.